esoteric research organization.
Hero paranormal, always setting up the pace, man. Crop circle tipping, Illuminati still tripping. Making those ears perk up, gonna make you question your earth. You better. Mystery bloodlines and secret society. Creepy shapeshifter says, come sit beside me. Yeah, go feel up. So what's with all this spy drone acting like UFOs? So we put Space Wolf, tiptoe through the dark, third eye blinding, tune in and blast off, blast off. Blast off, baby. Blast off. Blast off, baby. Blast off.
Blast off on another epic episode of the Hyper Anomalous Esoteric Research Organization podcast, also known as Hero Paranormal. My name is Ryan, the paranormal pontificator of the airwaves, bringing you an epic episode today. We're going to be talking to Leo Zagami. He is a best-selling author who has written over a dozen books, well over a dozen books, bestsellers in Italy, Japan, all over the world, and he's writing about topics other people are unwilling to even touch, delving into where our dystopian future is headed, whether or not it is part of a grand, elaborate, unified plan. And he makes no excuses. He does not back down, and he tells it like it is. One of my good friends, Leo Zagami, author of Confessions of an Illuminati. And before we get to that, there's some other strange things taking place all over, and we're gonna delve into all of it because there's really quite a bit. In fact, if you're familiar with cryptozoology in any way, shape, or form, there is something I've been researching called the U-28 creature. It's a creature that is named after the SMU-28, which is a German U-boat. During World War I, U-boats were used throughout the war. They were very elaborate technical equipment at the time and very efficient for taking out the enemy. Now, this particular creature was spotted by crew aboard a German U-boat. They saw it July 30th, 1915. The SMU-28 sent a torpedo headed directly towards a British cargo ship called the SS Iberian. Now, the Iberian was hit, and it did sink. Commander von Forstner of the U-28 ship claimed that the wreckage of the Iberian stayed visible for about a half a minute before an explosion sent it rocketing into the sky. Here's where things get weird. As debris flew, flying through the air, they noticed an enormous animal that they say, and I quote, resembled an aquatic crocodile. They claim it was about 60 feet long, with 4 limbs resembling large webbed feet, an extremely long tail that was pointed at the end, and a head which was also pointed to a point at the front. The mysterious animal quickly dove under the water and was never seen again. Many have wondered if this might be a extinct or thought to be extinct dinosaur, or whether it's entirely something different. The bottom line is, it happened. The crew saw it, and if you're into cryptozoology, it's worth a look. Now, mainstream media is finally starting to cover some of the geoengineering which has been taking place. Everybody's wondering what took so long. Scientists want to cool the planet by releasing chemicals into the ocean. Speaking of oceans, And this would be done by spraying salt water into the clouds and sending reflective particles into our atmosphere. This is something that we never thought would happen, but it seems as if scientists are resorting to once unthinkable solutions to cool the planet. Mainstream media is finally reporting on it for those who claim this is not taking place, that people are not releasing chemicals and doing so for, I guess, geoengineering is what they're claiming. That may not be the entire truth. But we're going to get a lot of answers today by someone who knows a lot more than I do. Leo Zagami, author of Confessions of an Illuminati. Before we get there, if you haven't had a chance to head on over to heroparanormal.com, please do. For the price of a cup of coffee a month, you can access all the content behind the paywall. There's a ton of it. And we also have a bunch of new t-shirts over at the shop. You can also buy things at happinessmedical.com, which also support the podcast. But let's get to it. With no further ado, my good friend, the one, the only, Leo Zagami. Welcome to the Hero Paranormal Podcast.
Thank you for having me on. As usual, it's always a pleasure, Ryan.
Oh my gosh, it's been too long. I've wanted to talk to you for some time. There's been so much evidence coming forward that you basically have predicted through your Confessions of an Illuminati series. Anybody that looks back in depth into the secrets which are held in your books can see that this is obviously part of a plan, that nefarious elite are all together on some kind of grand unified plan. And many of the things which have taken place, you have outlined in your Confessions of an Illuminati series. You have a new book. Tell us how things have been. You've got a lot of new news. And
Yes.
what brought you to write this new groundbreaking book?
Well, this year I finally became American, so I'm free of the tentacles that were holding me down from Europe. I'm finally a free man. My new book, Confessions of an Illuminati Volume 10, has been in the making since the beginning of October, when we started to see what happened in Gaza could really change the history of the world for the worst. So I was inspired to finally come out with a book that I've been studying and researching for many decades. I mean, this is a topic that I have been personally involved with, that not many people know much about. Is Islamic Freemasonry and the secret societies behind eternal conflict in the Middle East. As many times people forget that Freemasonry comes from the Middle East. It doesn't come from anywhere else. It's there that we find the first secret societies that really inspired also the future Hermetica, and of course we have a lot to say also in conjunction with the Rosicrucians, because in its mythological journey, Christian Rosenkreuz also goes through the whole of the Middle East, acquiring knowledge and also discovering things like the elementals that were also made known by Paracelsus. This is a book that wants to bring some clarity, that also wants to focus on aspects that are not really well known. I think there has not been really enough research in the last 100 years. I mean, up until the beginning of the 20th century, there were actually some researchers that were dwelling in this, let's say, Middle Eastern secrets. But then after that, it's all been focused on the wrong side of the conspiracy, on what they claimed is the big conspiracy with Greater Israel, and of course blaming everything on Greater Israel, on the Crusaders. And these Crusaders, what are these Crusaders? Basically, even the Muslims have very confused idea about themselves, because first of all, they want to completely ignore the rich Masonic history of the Middle East and Turkey. And then at the same time, they are not only ignoring, they are actually avoiding at times, carefully avoiding to actually discuss certain important figures in the Muslim world that were Freemasons, like, for example, Jamaluddin al-Afghani, which is considered the father of modern Islam and also of the Salafi movement. So in my book, I bring out also very many connections. As you know, there was a fascination between the 19th and the 20th century with Islam, especially within the more intellectual, the more prepared and spiritual aware Freemasons. And even Aleister Crowley ended up being inspired by Islam, as well as Rudolf von Bottendorf, who was initiated into the Memphis Rite, and later on in this Bektashi-driven Sufi order that taught him allegedly certain secrets which were then transmitted to Adolf Hitler. Now, I've always, as you know, made a distinction between various forms of Freemasonry, because Freemasonry is not such an unitarian concept as people imagine. We have, of course, the traditional forms of Freemasonry that sprang out of the 1717 and stayed traditional even after the 1870s, when the Grand Orient of France gave birth to its own course of Freemasonry. And these different forms of Freemasonry were reflected also in the Middle East. So there is a rich history. There is also a lot of problems that were created and generated, unfortunately, by an alliance that probably started already, though, back in the days of the Knights Templars, because the Knights Templars themselves were born out of what are the secret societies of the time in the Middle East, and in particular in Syria, and of course the order of the Assassins, of the assassins that worked as sicari, as killers for their own war against the Sunni Seljuk Turks. So people have a lot of confusion because, of course, there is myth and there is reality. But as you know, there is also a lot of Masonic texts that talk about, for example, the Druzes, that talk about the rich history of Islam, that of course is entrenched with secret societies, because the moment in which Islam was founded, they started to expand and into lands that had a very ancient history, because the moment in which the Arabs that were the first one converted by Muhammad reached Persia is basically ancient Sumeria, and then also Turkey with the city of Aran. Aran is the city that really preserved Hermetic for the future House of Wisdom in Baghdad. So this is really a rich book. There is not really so many books on the subject these days, like I said, and this is actually the only one that brings together the past and the present, so we can maybe write a different future. It's divided in 7 chapters. The first chapter is about the birth of Islam and the secret societies that manipulated it. I show the not-so-peaceful beginning of Islam. Then on chapter 2, after introducing the Cairo Lodge, because people don't know that Freemasonry, of course, at times includes and puts together the teachings of various mystery schools, but very few people know where these mystery schools come from. And when it comes to the order of assassins that worked with the Knights Templars today, there is not that many people that know that Hassan Isabah was initiated in Cairo, that basically in Cairo there was a lodge that called itself the Lodge of Reason, of Universal Reason, almost like they were envisioning a sort of Age of Enlightenment. They were basically, on one side, giving to the masses the opium of religion, as Karl Marx would have said, and on the other, they instead preserved in the closed doors of their lodge, and then later on in the universities, because they also gave birth to very powerful and important universities in the Muslim world, they preserved their knowledge, which was based on pure science. So when many centuries later the Brits were eager to somehow damage the Ottoman Empire, they started to finance all these secret organizations, or at least enter in contact with all these Sufis, especially the Sufis today. There is a wrong perception of the Sufis, especially in the Masonic world, because I notice both in Europe and here, Sufis welcomed in the lodges of Freemasonry like they were, the ultimate thing, messengers of peace, of love, Jalaluddin Rumi, and all this BS. In reality, it's very different, the situation. And we can say that before the birth of Salafi jihadism, and there was in Northern Africa a series of Sufi secret societies that were instrumentally used by both the French and later also the English to destabilize the area, and of course destabilize their main enemy, which was the Ottoman Empire that ruled for 8 centuries the Middle East. So in this book we find a very detailed account of all these things, and also documentation, photos, my own experiences in the Middle East, in Turkey, and personal experiences, because I ended up losing my son. I ended up basically being subject to a con, we can say, by the Sufis of the Gulen movement that portrayed themselves as innocent, as lovers of some kind of one world religion that is coming together. At the time, of course, I was still involved very much in various secret societies and also Masonic orders, and so I thought that was a sincere thing. And of course, I also, like I explain in my book, asked, in a way, made a ritual in front of the Pyramid of Giza, aided by the Butrus Ghali family, and it ended up with me meeting my first wife, which gave birth to this son. Of course, she was a descendant, though, of the Prophet Muhammad, and ultimately the Muslims wanted me to fully convert. They wanted me to not have anything to do with Freemasonry, to have nothing to do with any other books than the Quran. In a typical extremist fashion, they basically gave me an ultimatum. And then, because the Gulen movement, which my former wife belonged to, was so powerful and influential also in Norway, eventually I would be arrested for espionage, and I never saw my son again. So this book is about also personal experiences, but at the same time, of course, I talk about many of the secret societies, and they are so many in the Middle East, the rich history, and how it influenced the birth of modern jihadism, how, courtesy of the Illuminati, we got to the 9/11 mega ritual. But, of course, Freemasonry, as you know, is a great institution in certain states here in America. I'm saying certain states because certain states are not really, Masonically speaking, very good. They are too much bending on progressive politics, and they are, of course, also very much inclined these days on accepting way too much certain forms of occultism within their lodges. So, I mean, people that practice these forms of occultism, I'm not saying that they are practicing specifically in the lodge, because we know what a Masonic ritual is all about. However, there is also, as you know, various rites of Freemasonry, and in the Middle East, strangely enough, the ones that expanded more in certain moments of history, especially in Egypt, was the rite of Memphis, that later on, with the rite of Mizraim, formed Memphis and Mizraim, unified by John Yarker and, of course, Giuseppe Garibaldi, and we know that this rite is not considered regular here in the United States, where there is, of course, a prevalence of the ancient and accepted Scottish rite and the York rite. However, the secrets of the Knights Templars will always bring us to Islam, to the old man of the mountain. And it would bring us also to this obsession that many Freemasons at the time of Crowley, and even before Crowley, had with Islam. When I said earlier the name of Jamaluddin al-Afghani, this guy was a friend of Madame Blavatsky. This guy was a friend, actually was working with two important British Freemasons. And so it's a little bit controversial, this topic, of course, Ryan, but it's important to understand that there is a responsibility, even by the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite that was organizing Masonic lodges in the Middle East and Persia, that in a way also operated as intelligent hubs and no political networks. So, I mean, we have to be honest about things, and I went through what contemporary Masonic historians have been writing about the history of Freemasonry in the Middle East and also Islam and all that, and I almost all the time I found that they left out certain things. Like, for example, I will not nominate the author because I don't want to talk bad about him, but I went through a book recently in which Jamaluddin al-Afghani was portrayed, of course, for his Masonic work, but only his Masonic work in a certain form of Freemasonry rather than the other, when we all know that Jamaluddin al-Afghani, after entering the Eastern Star Lodge under the British jurisdiction, under English jurisdiction, because we have to be particular, because there is, of course, the Scottish, the English, and the Irish jurisdictions that might be confused. But I'm saying that Jamaluddin al-Afghani was not a regular Mason. He himself wanted to transform his lodge in a political operation, and for that reason, rightly so, he was invited by his own British intelligence supervisor to go to the Grand Orient of France, that in that period, as you know, broke from regularity, accepting politics in their lodges, and so on, and he made a choice. Now, this is not made clear by certain Masonic historians, almost like they like to leave out, for example, the irregular Masonic activity and only favor the historic part regarding the regular. But in the grand scheme of things, you have to talk about both these activities. You can't just leave it out and say, oh, no, that is not Freemason. No, that is you conveniently leaving it out because you are afraid of tainting in some way the name of Freemasonry. So this book doesn't is not scared in any way, shape, or form of talking about things. I mean, Albert Pike was a secret asset of the British Empire in America, for example. During the American Civil War, Great Britain had several secret assets in the United States, such as August Belmont, John Slidell, Albert Pike, of course, and the principal authors of the Confederacy used the issue of slavery as an abolition to carve up the United States into several contesting powers. It's a little bit like when during, just after the Declaration of Independence, the Brits started to foment more and more the Indians against the Americans out of convenience to destabilize the whole nation. So over and over again, we find that the Brits act in a really evil way. And I'm talking from a point of view that I'm half British, so I mean, it's not like, so when it comes to, for example, Jamaluddin al-Afghani, his British handlers were indeed two influential and smart figures among the Illuminati and the Freemason. One was Wilfred Scaven Blunt, who was actively working for the Masonic network. They was successful in the past on behalf of the British with the Sanusi Brotherhood, that also was known as Senusia, and was a Muslim political religious Sufi order and clan operating in Libya, that was founded in Mecca in 1837 by the Grand Sanusi. These are all secret societies that were basically infiltrated or co-opted within their game and scheme that ended up with the fall of the Ottoman Empire, with the Sykes-Picot Agreement, with the Balfour Declaration, and of course with the foundation of Israel. So all this is relevant. All of what we are talking about is relevant, because in order to know the past, the future, we need to know the past, and we need to of course, also know the past in order to understand better what is happening nowadays, this mess that we have in the Middle East.
Absolutely,
now,
yes.
Important. So in my book, I also explain the rich history, for example, of Iranian Freemasonry, because Iranian Freemasonry has at present a Grand Lodge of Exile in Iran that operates here thanks to the blessing of a jurisdiction that made it possible for them to petition for a Grand Lodge in exile, and nowadays they have their headquarters in Santa Monica. And the Grand Lodge of Iran in exile seems like an innocent fraternity, but in reality, if you go and study their history, they were the ones that, at the eve of the Iranian Revolution in 1979, helped also by the Vatican, that employed mobsters, real mobsters, Italian mobsters from the Sicilian mafia, managed to bring out of Iran a bunch of gold. And this was never admitted by the Ayatollah Khomeini, who, of course, couldn't make a brutta figura, as we say in Italy, and said that the Shah just went away with what he had, with nothing. That's complete lies. Mm-hmm. He brought all the gold out of there and brought it directly to the Vatican Bank. So there is very little known, for example, about Jamaluddin al-Afghani's origins, but we know that despite the appellation Afghani, he was actually Iranian, and so that's why I go back to him, because he was the first one who actually brainwashed a guy who went and killed the Shah back then. It wasn't a Shah of the Pahlavi dynasty, but it was a Shah. So there is a very much ignorance, and you see, I had also personal experiences. When I was initiated in the United Grand Lodge of England, in Kirby Lodge 2818, in Great Queen Street, I got to know an Iranian who wanted to become part of the Grand Lodge of Iranian in exile, who was actually initiated in that lodge. And so I had a direct experience because he told me all the history of the Grand Lodge of Iran in exile. But I also learned further on that there was a very rich history of Iranian Freemasonry that wasn't only regular, so-called regular, depending on the United Grand Lodge of England network, so to speak. But there was also a more irregular form that shaped up at the eve of the coup d'etat of 1954 that was aided and abetted by the CIA in Iran, which, of course, gave the possibility to the second Shah of the Pahlavi dynasty to stay in power until 1979. And this lodge, of course, was connected also with Cairo, and with this lodge in Cairo, which I talked about, which starts as a lodge which is not strictly of speculative Freemasonry, but then later on becomes one. And I show in my book a sword from 1777 that was buried in the desert in Egypt, and it's actually a sword which I was given the possibility to photograph by Mohammed El Grabri, who was a Freemason belonging, I think, to the Grand Lodge of New Jersey, because they don't have any regular Freemasonry in Egypt any longer. But he had this sword just as evidence that Freemasonry was actually born before what they say, because officially Freemasonry arrives in Egypt only in 1805, with basically 1802, with a French lodge, and it's actually the French that apparently bring Freemasonry for the first time, speculative Freemasonry. But then let's remember that these lodges often tend to merge with pre-existing secret societies. And that's why the Memphis Rite, that was very popular in France, that was actually created by a domain, by a Sabbatean, was very popular in Egypt, and opened several lodges because they could see the ancient knowledge of Egypt coming back through this Masonic rite. And I think that this book will be fascinating for Freemasons, it will be fascinating for non-Masons, it will be fascinating for Muslims in general that have been very much confused about their own Masonic legacy. Because when they are basically there blaming night and day, oh, Israel, oh, the Crusaders. Well, guys, maybe you should know that the Crusades were actually inspired by Islam. There was no such concept as holy war in Christianity. It was actually a secret society like the Order of Assassins that inspired the very birth of the Knights Templars, their modality, the way they are made and shaped. And also this holy war thing, because you have to build in the Christians something that was not there. The Christians, I repeat, until the Crusades, they didn't have the concept of holy war. This concept was a Muslim concept, and is born with a concept called ribat, that is also very popular today amongst the jihadists. The ribat is an abstract that refers to the voluntary defense of Islam, in which these ribats were originally like fortresses, houses, who were guesting basically those who defend Islam in jihad. And they can also at times be referred with other names such as kanka or teke in Turkish. But the ribat it's basically a way in which they were defending military also the Muslim pilgrims. And this kind of struck the Christians, who said, well, maybe we need people like that in our, in our own tradition. Otherwise, how are we going to defend the pilgrims who want to go down to the Holy Land? And contemporary use of the term ribat is common among jihadi groups like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and so on, or the various Salafi jihadists also operating in Gaza. But these ribats were also Sufi retreats, so you will have a mix of jihadists that were more like military jihadists, and then instead you have the internal jihadists, because you have the greater and the lesser jihad, and some people take it, of course, literally to the extent of going and killing and other people, and others instead as a war that needs to be fought within yourself. However, like I said, these retreats, these fortresses inspire also the Knights Templars. And this is something that will be shocking for a lot of people. Also, this very concept of crusade was inspired by the Islamic ribat. Because at that point, all those people in the Middle East are always pointing to the Crusaders, the evil Crusaders. Well, guys, you inspired the evil Crusaders. So, just, now when we talk about Gaza, we are talking about, nowadays, we saw that idiot of Joe Biden spending, I don't know, 300 and I don't know how many millions to build a port that washed ashore. That was another fortress of the Knights Templars. Mm-hmm. And at the time, Saladin slaughtered thousands and thousands of people who were obviously not Sunni Muslims. And nowadays, the same thing is happening instead to the Muslims. So, I mean, what comes around goes around. So, in my book, I explain a lot of things that will finally open the eyes of people who know jack shit, sorry if I say this word, about Islam, or know about the reality of Judaism or of Christianity. So, this means that finally we can all say that there is nobody that can take the moral and ethical high ground. Of course, I say the Christians have an advantage. The fact that you will judge them by their seeds, not by their fruits. Sorry, and the fruits of the tree of Christianity have definitely produced a more positive outcome for our society. So the book is going to really shock a lot of people, and of course, when you are talking about Islam is being divided in so many different schools and branches that it's always been very complex to understand for the average Joe. This book makes it more easy, and finally you will come out of reading this book and you will say, wow, I now understand what Islam is, and now I know what Islam is, and I also know that Islam has a relationship born a long, long time ago with the Knights Templars, and of course the heirs of the Knights Templars are also, as you know, the modern Freemasons. And some of these modern Freemasons acted just as bad as the Knights Templars did back in the days. They made a secret alliance with the Order of the Shishins, which were Shia Nizari, Islamic, so they were Shia. They were already fighting against the Sunni world, the Seljuk Turks, and that's why the assassins attempted 2 times to kill Saladin himself. and they killed many representatives of the Seljuk Turks that, if killed by the Templars, would have triggered a further war and further hate towards the Crusaders. So they simply employed them. This is shocking for a lot of people, because they will be like, geez, but I thought that, the Templars, the Crusaders were fighting Islam to impose. No, like Licio Gelli from the Worship of Master of Epitu Lodge once said, in a publication dedicated to the Knights Templars were clever in playing all the factions in the divided Impera, one against the other. So the British Empire, who wanted to move against the Ottomans that had been in charge for hundreds of years, at one point employed certain Freemasons within the Islamic world, and these Freemasons will eventually give birth to the modern concept of jihadism, the Salafi movement, and it all started with Jamaluddin al-Afghani, but then his disciples went on to found what is now known as the Muslim Brotherhood. Al-Banna founded the Muslim Brotherhood, and of course the Muslim Brotherhood then in turn created Hamas. And the Muslim Brotherhood with Al-Banna was allied also not only with the Brits but also with the Nazis. And it was the uncle of Yasser Arafat, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, that basically inspired partly the Holocaust with Adolf Hitler, who he met and talked with personally. So this is a very heavy responsibility if you think about it. If the Palestinians have the responsibility about the Holocaust, I mean, people, of course, the easy figure, they can say, oh, look, Zagami is a Zionist. No, nobody here is a Zionist. Everybody wants to be the more objective possible. And I am critical towards labor Zionism, which is basically what happened soon after the establishment of Zionism, which was a nationalistic organization, and transformed it in a socialist communist hellhole. That's why Israel these days is screwed up, because on one side you have the more conservative messianic ideas that were pushed by British Israelism that want to encourage the building of the Third Temple. On the other side you have the same forces that have instigated the birth of Hamas, and they all kind of focus on that little piece of land, which is the Temple Mount, on which the Second Temple was born. The Second Temple was basically there, and was later destroyed by the Romans, which is also the Temple of Solomon, the place for the Temple of Solomon, that basically is a central for the allegory of Freemasonry. Mm-hmm. So I think that this book will open the eyes of many people, also in regards, for example, of Aleister Crowley. Aleister Crowley was profoundly inspired by Islam. He was criticized by his fellow Masons here in America, in Detroit in particular, that the rituals of the OTO were too similar to Freemasonry, and he basically rewrote them. And at that point, instead of Hiram Abif, there was Mansur al-Alaj. And I explain in my book why he chose Mansur al-Alaj, why he also had Saladin in his initiation rituals. I mean, I was an 8th degree of the OTO, so I explain exactly which degrees are Islamic within the OTO, which, of course, these days the prevailing OTO is in fact called the Caliphate OTO. And they like to joke, oh, but Crowley was just joking because it was California Caliphate. No, he wasn't joking. He wasn't joking. There is a lot of Islam and dark forms of Sufism entrenched in those initiation rituals. At one point in the 3rd degree, just like in Freemason, you find yourself surrounding the tomb of Mansur al-Alaj, which is these days in Baghdad. This was no ordinary Sufi. This was a controversial guy. This was a guy that basically was a little bit like Osho Rainesh. He would arrive in Mecca with a bunch of followers, like a guru of some kind, saying that he was basically God. And this is completely in line with the Illuminati, because they want to be their own gods. And so eventually Mansur al-Alaj will be killed, will be executed, arrested and executed, but his head will be severed from the rest of his body, and it will be preserved for certain occult practices. So there is some very interesting things, and if you have any questions, I will.
Yeah, this is exactly the stuff that really gets me fired up, like you mentioned about the head. You give such a fresh perspective and clarity in this book to so much of this rich Masonic history, which literally are the secrets that connect the Western Illuminati to their Middle Eastern counterparts.
Yes.
And as far as the rich Masonic history, the Rosicrucian manifestos, Islamic, Arabic, Persian culture having so much to do with Freemasonry, Freemasonry often gets a bad rap in every sense of the word, which is not entirely fair because it's a lot like a tool or a firearm. This is knowledge, right? And people have villainized knowledge in general in modern times, Freemasonry especially. And
I think the worst enemy of Freemasonry are the Freemasons. Are the Freemasons with their ignorance and presumption that they can simply keep on being reserved without really revealing certain things. I mean, their secrecy in the lodges has always favored practices that in the end deemed actually, they were actually bad for Freemasonry itself. So, I mean, you know, the nature of Freemasonry is discretion. Is secrecy in their lodges. At least you keep a certain, of course, on the teachings. Nowadays, people are more open about it. I assisted here in California to lodge meetings in which it was partly also open to non-Masons. So, I mean, they try to be more open. But the thing is that over and over again, the lack of self-criticism, also the lack of knowledge, I think, of certain Masons, has made it possible for anti-Masons to strive.
100%. And I'm glad that you delve into the roots of Freemasonry in the Middle East, because back to the example of Freemasonry being like a firearm or knowledge, you know, everybody hates guns or knowledge until they need somebody with guns to defend them. And all of a sudden the gunslinger is a hero. The same is true of Freemasonry. And one of my very favorite secret alliances, which you delve into very deeply in your book, is between the Knights Templar and the Hashashin, or the Order of Assassins. And the Knights Templar worship the Baphomet. A lot of people have perverted or misunderstood the Baphomet story with their own beliefs. And in your honest opinion, Leo, what was or is the Baphomet to the best of your knowledge, and how does it affect us today, and how we are manifesting the apocalypse, or how Western civilization is manifesting the apocalypse?
Well, in my book, I bring actually archaeological evidence of the Baphomet, and this is what really is going to shock a lot of people. In fact, this book is already #1 in many charts on Amazon, including Islamic history, Islamic social sciences, and so on. Nobody has yet wrote a bad word about it or being able to debunk anything. A friend of mine, the late Gabriele Mandelkhan, who was a 30th degree ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, who was a Freemason but was also a Grand Master of the Sufi Jerai Helveti, a guy of great intellect and knowledge, he gave me the possibility of having a copy of the photo of the original Baphomet that was found in a Templar church between Syria and Turkey, and it's shocking for Muslims, but also for Christians. It's basically Muhammad on the cross with a turban and with his long beard. That was the real Baphomet. And if you think about it, in the 80s, Michael Bagent and his Richard Lay and the other guy, they came out with the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, no? Which was basically a great success. The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, when it came out, was, I guess, one of the biggest success. But it actually inspired, as you know, also Dan Brown. They even went in court for a court case, because Michael Bagent, by the way, it was the co-founder of Freemasonry Today, which became the official magazine of the United Kingdom Lodge of England. I mean, he was a Freemason. I actually had a lot of friends in common with him, and the co-founder of Freemasonry Today was a member of my lodge in London. So the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, that's where I first found, I mean, when I first purchased the Italian edition of it back in the in the early. It was basically, for me, this book was a family book which I already had read in my family library, because since the early 80s we had it in a family library. But when I bought it myself, I started to study it in depth, and I saw that basically Michael Bagent, Richard Leigh, and Harry Lincoln had the idea that Baphomet was derived from an Arabic term, Abu Fihamet, meaning the father of understanding or father of wisdom. And father in Arabic is also taken to imply source, rather than from an old French name like some say for the founder of Islam. So after this book, which many scholars, as you know, they don't take too seriously the work of the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, because it goes way too speculative, especially when it comes down to the Prayer of Zion, which in the end is a rather relative and very recent secret society from after the war. I mean, it's a French secret society, of course, claims an ancient history of Grand Mass and all that, but it was constructed, you know. In any way, I then got another book. I remember it was 1992. The book was The Knights Templars and Their Myth by Peter Partner. And as the previous Holy Blood and Holy Grail, this book also was talking about Baphomet. And Baphomets in the Occitan, in the French Occitan term, the original French that actually is rendered as Mohammed. And Peter Partner cites basically Joseph von Hammer-Purstall essay Mysterium Baphometis Revelatum, which was published in Vienna in 1818. And this book talked about the Knights Templars worshipping this Baphomet that basically was an idol based on Mohammed. Now, nobody believed that. Nobody has believed neither the claims of Peter Partner, neither the ones of Michael Bagent and his associates. So, because it was all based in theory. I bring in this book the evidence, the actual image that is kept in a depot in Istanbul, and that they don't want to show in a museum because they're afraid of the reaction of the Muslim world. The Muslim world today, just like every day, is obsessed with the fact that Muhammad can't be portrayed in any way, shape, or form. Imagine having Muhammad on a cross. It's an heresy. It's an heresy that is intolerable for them. Any museum displaying this artifact will be blown up in 24 hours. So this, but I showed in my book, I showed actually where my friend Gabriele Mandelkan, I actually showed Gabriele Mandelkan wearing his sash, 30th degree sash, to prove he was a Freemason. I also show where he published for the first time this discovery, this cross of Muhammad in the Italian Dictionary for Islam, and I also show it in its entirety so people can finally have a look at it. And nowadays it's like the genie is out of of the bottle, and the Muslim world will have to live with it. The fact is that the Shia Muslims, or the Nizari Shia Muslims that created the Assassins, were no ordinary Muslims. They were actually worshipping something that the rest of the Islamic world will have derided them and thought they were crazy and actually killed them for it. So they converted the part of the Knights Templars, and those Knights Templars started to worship Baphomet, which was basically Mohammed on a cross, which was, of course, the mythology surrounding this Baphomet is of interest because the cross has a symbolic meaning, as you know. Not only the cross where you hang, people, Jesus was sacrificed on the cross. It has also, from ancient Egypt, a pre-existing also importance with the Tao. So the Baphomet later on with Eliphas Levi becomes something different. It becomes what today is paraded in the Capitol Hills of America by the Satanic Temple. That is basically a distortion of the original Baphomet. But Aleister Crowley, who wanted to imitate Islam, who went to Cairo to get channeling this book of the law, just like Muhammad had channeled the Quran. Of course, Crowley did it in a matter of 3 days. Muhammad took 30 years. There's a little bit of a difference there. Huh? Mm-hmm. But the Ordo Templi Orientis today is filled with Islamic symbology. If you know the rituals, and many people, of course, don't have access to the rituals, so I wanted to cite those rituals, this to give people an understanding of also the central mysteries surrounding Islam that are included in the OTO. And Crowley himself talks about a messenger of Horus, Aivas. But in reality, Aivas is basically a sort of anagram of Aisawa, which was the secret societies of Sufis which Crowley had been initiated in.
That's right. And he was even studying the Yazidi. A lot of people don't realize how much influence was gathered from the Middle East by Crowley and how it all came to the West. And, it very much is steeped by Middle Eastern culture.
Mm-hmm. Well, absolutely. Like I said, the Quranic verses took many more years to write than Crowley's Book of the Law. But Crowley was particularly obsessed with Islam. In fact, he learned the Islamic ways very accordingly to his own work. He was capable of passing through the Middle East as a Muslim. However, he never managed to go to Mecca, which was his dream. His dream was going to Mecca, but he never managed because people discouraged him, said, listen, they will see that you are an English and that you are not a real Muslim. They will kill you. Mm-hmm. So he was discouraged, and eventually he decided not to go. But his idea was to actually, and I also talk about the Yazidis because Aivas, spelled Aivaz, was the true most ancient name of the Yazidis. So definitely he was also influenced by the Yazidi, who themselves are considered satanic by Christians. Mm-hmm. And so there is this influence, and I talk about it in my book, of these two elements. And I talk also about the details of the Sufi order that initiated Aleister Crowley, and its connection also to Al-Azhar University in Cairo, and the followers of these schools in the Islamic world, the secret societies are called tariqas. Tariqas are basically the Sufi secret societies. But there was a guy who Crowley was very inspired from, who was called Sir Richard Francis Burton, who managed to disguise himself as an Islamic pilgrim and made the trek into the heart of Arabia, visiting the holy cities of Medina and Mecca. And he is probably one of the first Freemasons, Western Freemasons, who made it alive out of Mecca. In more recent times, the Shriners were kicked out of Mecca because deemed heretical. And at the same time, we have also Aleister Crowley, who said he was the reincarnation of Count Cagliostro. And Count Cagliostro said that he actually grew up in the Middle East and that he visited, of course, Mecca and Medina. And we don't know how honest he was in his assertions. He tended to embellish things. But Burton instead, who managed to get to Mecca, he later on joined the British Theosophical Society, and he was, of course, connected with one of these Illuminati sects of the Middle East called the Qadriya Order, which is a very important Sufi sect. And so there is many connections, between Freemasonry, the Middle Eastern secret societies, and people don't know about these things, and they really deserve to be studied because they will enrich everybody, and they will also make us understand the responsibility that we have. Because it's not only about Islam and the OTO, or Islam and Freemasonry, or Islam and the Rosicrucians, because in the Fama Fraternitatis, the Christian Rosenkreuz, after Cyprus, goes all around the Middle East, and he gets initiated into the mysteries and knowledge in Fez, in the city of Fez. Christian Rosenkreuz learns about the elementals, which are basically the genies of the Islamic tradition. And it was basically Rudolf von Sembotendorf, this German guy who in his young age wanted to emulate Christian Rosenkreuz, who went through the Middle East, went to Egypt, went to Turkey, and eventually got initiated by these Sabbatians Domè in Salonico, in the right of Memphis, and he also was given this secret knowledge that then he published in Germany right at the eve of Nazism, when Adolf Hitler was arrested, and he also had collaborated with Adolf Hitler, who had joined his lodge of the Germanen Orden, known as the Thule Gesellschaft. So these are facts. There is nothing that is left, and how you say, is not revealed in this book. It's like I tried to be objective. I didn't want to take sides, but I have to be objective. So,
and I think you are. I think you are very objective. And I know that you have another very important engagement, Leo. Let's tell listeners where they can get more Leo Zagami, subscribe to you, etc.
Well, they can get, of course, all the information regarding my work, my latest book on leozagami.com, together with my latest articles. And thank you so much for having me. I hope that maybe in the next few months we can have another chat on this book, because, as you know, we only scratched the surface. There is so much to talk about. I think that people, especially here in the West, Freemasons, but also not Freemasons, anybody interested in what is really going on in the Middle East will be really helped by this book. When we talked about Baphomet, there is also those who say it was a decapitated Sufi martyr, that it might be Mansur al-Hallaj mixed together with that cross of Mohammed. There is definitely a lot of interesting material in this book that I will finally, though, reveal the influence that these people had. I mean, even in the very foundation of the OTO, there was a Sufi mystic called Soliman Ben Haifa who influenced Karl Kerner. There was, of course, a very big influence in speculative Freemasonry, because Hermetica will not have ever reached Europe without the Muslim world that transmitted this knowledge, retransmitted this knowledge that after the fall of the Roman Empire had been lost. And it's very interesting how the actual Muslim world had a golden age, but this golden age was kind of like evaporated because it was based on conquest, not on creativity. It was based about conquest and absorbing the knowledge of the places where they were conquering, but they were unfortunate in the way they expanded, because they never really then encourage creativity and encourage knowledge in a way that it could actually freely develop. It was always very close. Certain knowledge was kept in these secret societies because of the fear that Islam, in one way or another, they were violating the tenets of Islam. So everything was kept very hush-hush, no? And, of course, we have all the influence that territories like Persia already had from other traditions, Zoroastrianism, Judaism, even Buddhism, but many Gnostic sects were all over the Middle East. The Manichaeans and Islam didn't simply eliminate them. At times, these forms, these religions, when they were forced to convert, they will simply create some kind of secret establishment to preserve this knowledge. A little bit like the Hermetica was preserved by certain secret societies before the Christian church opened up a little bit, no? And so we see that in the Muslim world, these great Sufi thinkers were kind of blending elements from this past into this Muslim tradition. And they were actually criticized until a guy called Al-Ghazali came to their aid and actually opened up Sufism also to the traditional Muslim world by kind of like embracing the aspects And of course, this went again, so though the philosopher Avicenna, Ibn Sina, which is in the previous decades had made another kind of, had promoted another kind of approach. In the end, it seems like here, just to summarize it, we reacted in a certain way to Illuminism and to progress, and they reacted in a completely different way. And unfortunately, the two ways kind of collide, and now we are in a collision course that continues to this day. But with this book, I hope that people will have a better understanding of this mess. Thank you so much for having me on.
Isn't that the truth? Thank you. Such a blessing, and have a wonderful day, Leo. Appreciate you.
Thank you. God bless. And speak to you soon, Ryan. Take care.
There he is, ladies and gentlemen, the one, the only Leo Zagami, talking about his new book, Confessions of an Illuminati, Volume 10, Islamic Freemasonry and the Secret Societies Behind the Eternal Conflict in the Middle East. And this book is an absolutely beautiful book. Even the artwork on the cover and on the back is absolutely stunning. And I have to say, the personal touch, his personal experiences involving his son and others are absolutely extraordinary. But for listeners, I've purchased quite a few copies of this book, and I have a great giveaway for listeners of this podcast. I am giving away fresh, brand new copies of Confessions of an Illuminati, Volume 10, to any listener who subscribes to HeroParanormal.com, the I Have 5 on it tier, by 5 p.m. tonight. The free book is for anyone listening who subscribes. You can't beat that. While on the topic of subscription, definitely subscribe to LeoZagami.com. He is consistently bringing fresh perspectives, amazing research, and clarity to one of the most complex enigmas in human history. The secret alliances between Knights Templar and the Hashashin, or the Order of the Assassins. Freemasonry has a very long, deep history, and it's something that a lot of people overlook. Leo does not. Leo is fully aware of it, and he knows exactly what has transpired in the past. Talking with Leo about Freemasonry is like talking to Steve Jobs about computers. He's very familiar with my adoration, research, investigation, and following of the great work. Freemasonry is one of those things that is surrounded by so much disinformation and misinformation that you really need someone like Leo to enlighten you, to illuminate the path and guide your way. He is very much like a beacon of light, so that people can follow and forge their way towards their destination without getting stuck in the mire, caught in the weeds, and not get off track and disinformed, misinformed, or receive perverted beliefs. Leo is aware of things like the Sabbatean Frankists, the true nature of Baphomet. And that's why this book is a top new release to subject matter and history that is quite complex. And he knows his stuff. He is the best mind when it comes to these things. And it is an absolute blessing to talk to him. He's one of the best guys around. I really love Leo. Definitely do what you can to support his work. Also, don't forget that subscription deal to Hero Paranormal. You will get that free book. A brand new, fresh copy of Confessions of an Illuminati, Volume 10. Subscribe to the I Have 5 on it tier at HeroParanormal.com by 5 p.m. and it's yours. I do have to put the caveat that it cannot be a subscribe and then immediate unsubscribe. That doesn't work. You got to subscribe. Anyway, there it is. Great deal, great book, completely free. For listeners, there's possibly been no time when it's more important to know about these things. Also, don't forget to support HeroParanormal.com. Anything you purchase at the shop, we've got new stuff there, more stuff coming, and anything you purchase at HappinessMedical.com helps support the podcast. Thank you so much. Have a blessed afternoon, and until next time, keep your eyes to the skies, feet on the ground, but don't forget to take a look around.
Follow me with your darkest eyes. Follow me with your shape-shifting smiles, and I see you. Maybe they'll believe you. Illuminati, occult dawn trial, silver discs and hidden files, and we see you. We've got